The first time I saw him, my world cracked open like a fault line I didn't know existed. I was 28, sitting in a dive bar in Brooklyn, nursing a beer I didn't want, when his laugh cut through the haze of cigarette smoke and regret. By the time our eyes met, I was already lost, and I didn't even know it. My name is Ethan Caldwell, born and raised in a small town in upstate New York where the biggest scandal was Mrs. Thompson's prize-winning apple pie recipe getting stolen. I grew up on a steady diet of football, church on Sundays, and the unspoken rule that you marry a nice girl, settle down, and keep the family name clean. I followed the script, dated cheerleaders, landed a finance job in Manhattan, and got engaged to Sarah, the kind of woman who made everyone jealous. Life was a straight line, predictable, safe, until Julian walked into it. That night in the bar, I wasn't looking for trouble. I was there to meet my buddy Mike, who was late as usual. The place was a hole in the wall called the Rusty Anchor, all chipped paint and sticky floors. But it had cheap drinks and a jukebox that played Springsteen. I was scrolling through my phone, half listening to Born to Run, when Julian slid into the booth across from me. "You look like you're waiting for the world to end," he said, his voice low, teasing, like he already knew me. I laughed, caught off guard. "Just waiting for a friend," I said, glancing up. "Mistake." His eyes were the kind you don't forget, deep brown, flecked with gold, like they held secrets I'd never unravel. He was lean, with a mess of black curls and a leather jacket that looked like it had seen a dozen cities. He wasn't from here. I could tell. "Mind if I keep you company till he shows?" he asked, already settling in. I should have said no. I had a fiancé, a plan, a life. But something about him, maybe the way he leaned forward, like I was the only person in the room, made me nod. We talked. Or rather, he talked, and I listened, hanging on to every word like a lifeline. Julian was a photographer, traveling the country, chasing stories and faces and places most people overlooked. He told me about shooting a drag show in New Orleans, the dancers' courage lighting up the night. He spoke of a kid in Chicago who'd run away from home because his parents couldn't accept who he was. "People are stories," he said, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "What's yours?" I didn't know how to answer. My story. It was ordinary, safe, but sitting there, with his gaze pulling at something buried deep. I felt the weight of every choice I'd made without questioning. "I'm just a guy," I said finally, shrugging. "Work. Wedding plans. You know." He tilted his head, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Sounds like you're living someone else's story." I wanted to argue, but the word stuck. Mike showed up eventually, breaking the spell, and Julian slipped away with a nod and a "maybe I'll see you around." I went home to Sarah that night, but I couldn't sleep. His words echoed, gnawing at me. Who was I living for? The next week, I found myself back at the Rusty Anchor. I told myself it was for the beer, the vibe, anything but him. But when I saw Julian at the bar, sketching in a worn notebook, my heart kicked like I'd sprinted a mile. He looked up, grinned, and waved me over. "Knew you'd be back," he said, like it was fate. We fell into a rhythm after that. Nights at the bar, talking about everything and nothing, his travels, my childhood, the way the city felt alive at 3 a.m. He showed me photos on his phone, raw and unfiltered, of people living truths I'd never dared to touch. One night, he handed me his camera, a beat-up Nikon, and told me to try. I fumbled with it, laughing. But when I looked through the lens, the world shifted. I really saw him, and something in me broke open. Sarah noticed the change. "You're distant," she said one night, her voice tight, as we sat in our apartment, the TV droning in the background. "Is it the wedding? Work?" I couldn't tell her it was Julian, because I didn't understand it myself. I wasn't supposed to feel this way. I was straight. I had a plan. But every time I saw him, that plan felt like a cage. One night, Julian invited me to a gallery show in Soho. His photos on display. I went, telling Sarah it was a work thing. The gallery was packed. All exposed brick and pretentious chatter. But his works silenced the room. Each photo was a story: grief, joy, defiance, love. I found him in the corner, nursing a whiskey, looking out of place in his own spotlight. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice soft. "I think you're incredible," I said, and the words slipped out before I could stop them. His eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, the world was just us. Then someone called his name, and the moment shattered. I left the gallery shaken, walking the city streets until dawn. I wasn't ready to face what was growing inside me, but I couldn't outrun it either. Julian was unraveling everything I thought I knew about love, about myself, about what it meant to be free. The weeks that followed were a tightrope walk between who I was and who I was becoming. I'd go to work, crunch numbers in a midtown office, and smile through dinner with Sarah. But my mind was always somewhere else on Julian. On the way his voice softened when he talked about the people he photographed. On the way his hand brushed mine once. Accidental, but electric. I was drowning in questions I couldn't ask out loud. Sarah deserved better. She was kind, smart, the kind of woman who'd planned our wedding with meticulous care, down to the shade of the napkins. But every time she talked about venues or guest lists, I felt like I was suffocating. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked one evening, her blue eyes searching mine. We were in our kitchen, the dishes still in the sink, the air heavy with unspoken truths. I wanted to tell her, but how do you explain a storm you don't understand? "I'm just stressed," I lied, hating myself for it. She nodded, but the doubt in her eyes lingered. I started staying out later, claiming work deadlines. But I was at the Rusty Anchor, waiting for Julian. He didn't always show, but when he did, it was like the world made sense again. We'd talk until the bar closed, then wander the city, our footsteps echoing on empty streets. He'd point out murals, graffiti, little pieces of art hidden in plain sight. "You've got to look closer," he'd say, and I wasn't sure if he meant the city or me. One night, we ended up on a rooftop in Williamsburg, the skyline glittering across the river. Julian had a friend who owned the building, and we'd snuck up with a bottle of cheap wine. The air was crisp, October biting at our skin, but I felt warm just being near him. He was telling me about a photo he'd taken in San Francisco, a couple embracing in the rain, their love raw and unapologetic. "That's what I want to capture," he said, his breath visible in the cold. Truth, no matter how messy. I looked at him, the city lights reflecting in his eyes, and something snapped. "What's your truth?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned to me, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, I thought he'd laugh it off. But then he stepped closer, so close I could feel the heat of him, and said, "You already know." My heart pounded, a drumbeat I couldn't ignore. I wanted to step back, to run, to cling to the safety of the life I'd built. But I didn't. I leaned in, and when our lips met, it was like the world rearranged itself. His kiss was soft, then urgent, and I felt alive in a way I never had. But the second we pulled apart, guilt crashed over me like a wave. Sarah. The ring on her finger. The life I was supposed to want. I can't, I said, stepping back, my voice shaking. Julian's face fell, but he didn't push. I get it, he said quietly. You've got a lot to figure out. He left me on that rooftop, the city sprawling below, and I felt like I'd just lost something I'd only begun to understand. The next day, I avoided the rusty anchor. I threw myself into work, into wedding plans, into anything that would drown out the memory of that kiss. But it was no use. Julian was in my head, in my dreams, in every quiet moment. I started questioning everything: why I'd never felt this way with Sarah, why I'd followed a path that felt so wrong now. Was I gay? Bi? Something else? The labels terrified me, not because of what they meant, but because they meant I'd been lying to myself my whole life. Sarah sensed it. She stopped asking what was wrong and started watching me, her silence louder than any argument. One night, she found me staring at my phone, at a photo Julian had sent, a candid shot of me laughing at the bar, my guard down in a way I'd never seen. Who's that from? She asked, her voice sharp. I mumbled something about a friend, but she wasn't fooled. Ethan, if you're not in this, tell me now, she said, tears in her eyes. I wanted to reassure her, to say I loved her, but the words wouldn't come. I needed answers. So I went looking for Julian. I found him at a coffee shop in the East Village, his camera on the table, his notebook open. He looked up, surprised but not angry, and gestured for me to sit. I'm a mess, I admitted, the words spilling out. I don't know who I am anymore. He reached across the table, his hand stopping short of mine. You're not a mess, he said. You're just waking up. His words hit like a punch. And for the first time, I let myself cry in front of someone. Not because I was sad, but because I was finally seeing the truth. Waking up was painful. It meant dismantling everything I thought I knew, piece by piece, like tearing down a house I'd lived in my whole life. Julian didn't push, but he was there, a steady presence as I grappled with questions that felt too big to answer. I started researching, late at night when Sarah was asleep, reading stories of men who'd come out later in life, who'd loved women but found something deeper with men. The internet was a rabbit hole of forums, articles, and confessions, each one chipping away at the walls I'd built around myself. I wasn't alone, but that didn't make it easier. I was still engaged, still lying to Sarah, still pretending I could go back to who I was before Julian. One afternoon, I met Julian at a park in Dumbo, the Brooklyn Bridge looming in the distance. He was photographing kids playing in the grass, their laughter cutting through the city noise. You're good at this, I said, watching him work. He shrugged, adjusting his lens. It's not about being good. It's about seeing people for who they are. I wanted him to see me, the real me, but I didn't know who that was yet. We walked along the waterfront, the conversation light at First Movies. Music, the best taco truck in the city. But then he asked, "What's holding you back, Ethan?" His voice was gentle, but it cut deep. "Everything," I said, staring at the river. "Sarah, my family, my job. I've got a life people dream of. I can't just throw it away." He stopped walking, turning to face me. You're not throwing anything away. You're choosing to live honestly. There's a difference. I wanted to believe him, but the fear was a weight I couldn't shake. My parents were traditional, the kind who'd never understand. My friends would look at me differently, and Suraj'd be devastated. I told Julian as much, and he listened, his expression soft but unyielding. You can't live for them, he said. You'll lose yourself. That night, I went home and found Sarah waiting up. She'd found Julian's photos online. His gallery show tagged with my name and a comment. Who is he? Ethan, she demanded, her voice breaking. Why are you hiding this? I froze, the truth clawing its way up. He's a friend, I said, but it sounded hollow even to me. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You're lying. To me. To yourself. I deserve better than this. She was right. I sat her down, my hands shaking, and told her about Julian, not the kiss, not the details, but how he'd made me question everything. I don't know what I am, I said, my voice barely audible. But I'm not the man you think I am. Sarah didn't yell. She didn't scream. She just looked at me, her eyes full of pain, and said, I can't marry someone who doesn't know who they are. She packed a bag and left for her sister's, the door closing with a quiet click that felt like a gunshot. I was alone, the apartment suffocatingly silent. I called Julian, my voice raw. I told her. I said, she's gone. He didn't say much, just asked where I was and showed up an hour later with takeout and a bottle of bourbon. We sat on my couch, the city humming outside, and he let me talk about Sarah, about the guilt, about the fear of what came next. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened, and that was enough. The next few weeks were a blur. Sarah and I called off the engagement, a decision that felt both inevitable and unbearable. My parents called, confused, asking why we'd split. I couldn't tell them the truth. Not yet. At work, I was distracted, my numbers slipping, my boss noticing. But Julian was a constant, pulling me out of the darkness with late-night talks and impromptu adventures. One day, he dragged me to Coney Island, the boardwalk alive with summer's last gasp. We rode the Ferris wheel, the world spinning below, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed without forcing it. You're gonna be okay, Julian said, his hand brushing mine as the ride slowed. I looked at him, the wind tousling his curls, and felt something shift. Not certainty, but hope. Hope was a fragile thing, easily crushed by reality. I was trying to rebuild, to find my footing in a world that felt foreign. But the weight of my old life kept pulling me back. My parents demanded answers, their calls relentless. What happened with Sarah? My mom asked, her voice thick with worry. You two were perfect. I dodged the truth, mumbling about growing apart. But it was only a matter of time before they'd push harder. My friends were no better. Mike, my best friend since high school, kept asking why I was acting weird, why I was spending so much time with that photographer guy. I couldn't tell him. Not because I didn't trust him, but because saying it out loud would make it real. Julian, though, was a lifeline. We started spending more time together, not just at the bar, but in his world art shows. Open mics, late-night diners where the coffee was terrible, but the conversations were everything. He introduced me to his friends, an eclectic mix of artists and dreamers who lived unapologetically. One of them, a trans woman named Lila, told me her story over greasy fries. her voice steady as she described leaving her small town, her family's rejection, and the freedom she'd found in being herself. "It's not about them," she said, her eyes kind but fierce. "It's about you." Her words stuck with me, but so did the fear. I wasn't like Lila, or Julian, or any of them. I'd spent my life fitting in, blending into the background. Coming out meant standing out, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. But with Julian, I wanted to try. He made me want to be brave. One night, we ended up at his apartment, a tiny loft in Bushwick cluttered with prints and camera gear. He was showing me a series he'd shot in rural Alabama, portraits of queer kids who'd found community despite the odds. "They're stronger than I'll ever be," he said, his voice soft with admiration. I looked at him, sprawled on the couch, his passion lighting up the room, and I couldn't hold back anymore. I kissed him, not like on the rooftop, hesitant and scared, but with everything I had. He kissed me back, his hands tangling in my hair, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was betraying anyone. It was just us. No guilt. No shame. We didn't sleep together that night, just kissed and talked until the sun came up. But it was enough. It was everything. The next morning, reality hit. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Saw you with that guy last night." "What's going on?" "Man." My stomach dropped. I hadn't realized anyone had seen us. Hadn't thought about how it looked. I didn't respond, but the fear crept back, cold and heavy. Julian noticed my mood shift. "You okay?" he asked, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. I told him about Mike, about the text, about the dread pooling in my chest. He listened, then took my hand. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said, "but you can't keep running from them either." He was right, but it didn't make it easier. I spent the next few days avoiding Mike, avoiding my parents, avoiding the truth. But it found me anyway. Sarah called, her voice calm but firm. "I'm moving out," she said. "I need you to be honest with me, Ethan. For closure." I met her at a cafe, the same one where we'd had our first date. She looked tired, but composed, her engagement ring gone. "Are you in love with him?" she asked. No anger, just a quiet need to know. I swallowed hard, the truth burning my throat. "I think so," I said, and it was the first time I'd admitted it out loud. She nodded, tears in her eyes, but a small smile too. "I want you to be happy," she said, "even if it's not with me." We hugged, and it felt like letting go of a piece of myself, but also like setting her free. I left the cafe lighter, but the weight wasn't gone. I had to face Mike, my parents, the world. And I had to decide if I was ready to be the man Julian saw in Minute, the one I'd been pretending to be. Facing Mike was harder than I expected. We met at a sports bar in Midtown, the kind of place we'd gone to 100 times, cheering for the Yankees over wings and beer. But this time, the air felt different, charged with the weight of what I hadn't said. He didn't waste time. "So, what's the deal with you and that Julian guy?" he asked, his tone half curious, half accusing. I took a deep breath, the noise of the bar fading into the background. "I'm figuring things out," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I think I might be, not straight." The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else. But saying them lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Mike stared at me, his beer halfway to his mouth. "You're serious?" he asked, and I nodded. He leaned back, processing, then let out a low whistle. Man, I didn't see that coming. You and Sarah were, like, the perfect couple. I thought so too, I said, and told him about Julian. About the confusion, the fear, the pull I couldn't ignore. Mike listened, his expression shifting from shock to something softer. You're still you, right? He said finally. Just, with better taste in guys than I expected. We laughed, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. My parents were another story. I went home for Thanksgiving, the first time since the breakup. The house smelled like my childhood turkey, sage, my mom's pumpkin pie. But the tension was new. They kept asking about Sarah, about what went wrong, and I kept dodging until I couldn't anymore. After dinner, sitting in the living room with the fire crackling, I told them, I'm seeing someone. I said, my heart pounding. His name is Julian. The silence was deafening. My mom's face froze, her coffee cup trembling in her hands. My dad just stared at the floor. You're confused, my mom said finally, her voice tight. This isn't you, Ethan. It is, I said, and the words felt like a declaration of war. They didn't yell, but the disappointment in their eyes was worse. My dad muttered something about needing time, and my mom hugged me, but it was stiff, like she was holding a stranger. I left the next morning, the rift between us wider than ever. Julian was waiting when I got back to the city. I told him everything, the hurt spilling out as we sat on his couch, his arms around me. They'll come around, he said, but I wasn't sure I believed him. Still, being with him felt right, like a piece of me had finally clicked into place. We started building something real. Dates in Central Park, lazy Sundays in bed, his camera always clicking, capturing moments I'd never thought to notice. But the world wasn't as kind as he was. At work, rumors started swirling someone had seen me with Julian, and the whispers followed. My boss called me in, his tone polite but pointed. Keep your personal life out of the office, he said, and I knew it wasn't a suggestion. The pressure was building, and I felt it in every corner of my life. Friends I'd known for years stopped calling. My parents sent texts, but they were short, formal, like they didn't know me anymore. And then there was Julian, who deserved all of me, but I was still holding back, scared of what it meant to fully embrace this new version of myself. One night, we went to a queer bar in the West Village, a place pulsing with life drag queens, couples dancing, people unapologetically themselves. Julian fit right in, laughing with friends, his hand in mine. But I felt like an outsider, hyper-aware of every glance, every whisper. You okay? He asked, pulling me close. I nodded, but I wasn't. The fear was back, louder than ever. Later, as we walked home, he stopped under a streetlight, his face serious. Ethan, I'm all in, he said, but I need to know you are too. His words hit hard. I wanted to say yes, to promise him everything, but the weight of my old life, my family's rejection, the world's judgment, it was too much. I kissed him instead, hoping it was enough. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The fear didn't let go. It clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake, even as Julian and I grew closer. We were falling in love, I knew it. Felt it in every look, every touch, but love wasn't enough to silence the noise. The world I'd known was slipping away, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to let it go. Work became a battleground. The rumors had spread. and colleagues I'd once considered friends started keeping their distance. One guy, a senior analyst named Greg, made a point of calling me confused in meetings, his smirk barely hidden. I ignored it, kept my head down, but it chipped away at me. My performance reviews tanked, and my boss hinted at restructuring if I didn't get it together. I needed the job. New York wasn't cheap, and I was already drowning in credit card debt from the canceled wedding. Julian saw the toll it was taking. "You don't have to stay," he said one night, as we lay in his bed, the city's hum filtering through the window. "There's a whole world out there. Ethan, you could start over." The idea was tempting, running away, leaving the judgment behind, but it felt like giving up. I wasn't ready to be that person, the one who fled. Instead, I tried to fight. I reached out to Lila, the trans woman I'd met through Julian, hoping for advice. We met at a diner in Hell's Kitchen, her bright red lipstick a stark contrast to the gray morning. "Coming out isn't a moment," she said, stirring her coffee. "It's a process. You lose people, but you find yourself." She told me about her own journey, the family she'd lost, the community she'd built. "You've got Julian," she said. "That's a start." She was right, but I was still terrified. My parents hadn't called in weeks, and when I finally reached out, my mom's voice was cold. "We're praying for you," she said, like I was sick. I hung up, my chest tight, and went to Julian's. He didn't ask questions, just held me until I could breathe again. We started planning a trip, something to get away from the city's weight. Julian suggested New Orleans, a place he loved for its vibrancy, its defiance. "It'll be good for us," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. I agreed, desperate for a break, for a chance to be us without the world watching. The trip was magic at first. We wandered the French Quarter, ate beignets at Café du Monde, danced to jazz and smoky bars. Julian's camera was always out, capturing the city's soul, capturing me in ways I'd never seen myself open. Alive, happy. But even there, I couldn't escape. A group of tourists stared when we held hands, their whispers cutting through the music. I pulled away, instinct kicking in, and Julian's face fell. "You're still hiding," he said later, his voice quiet but firm. He was right, and it hurt. I wanted to be brave, to be the man he deserved, but every step forward felt like a battle. Back in New York, the tension grew. Julian was patient, but I could see the strain in his eyes, the way he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking. He was all in, but I was still straddling two worlds, and it was tearing us apart. One night, it came to a head. We were at his loft, cooking dinner, when he asked, "What do you want, Ethan?" "Really?" I froze, the knife in my hand still over a half-chopped onion. "You," I said, but it sounded weak, like I was trying to convince myself. He shook his head. "I don't want half of you. I want all of you." The words stung, because they were true. I was giving him pieces, holding back the rest out of fear. "I'm trying," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm scared." He stepped closer, his hands on my face, his eyes searching mine. "I know," he said, "but you can't keep living for everyone else. You have to choose." I didn't have an answer. We ate in silence, the distance between us growing. That night, I went back to my apartment, alone for the first time in weeks. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Julian's words echoing. "Choose." But choosing meant losing me family, my friends, the life I'd known. Was I ready for that? Could I ever be? Choosing wasn't a single moment. It was a series of battles, each one harder than the last. I spent days replaying Julian's words, torn between the man I loved and the life I'd been taught to want. The city felt like a pressure cooker. Every glance, every whisper amplifying my fear. But the thought of losing Julian was worse. I started small. I told another friend, Jess, a coworker who'd always been kind. We met for coffee, and I blurted it out. I'm in love with a guy. She didn't flinch, just reached for my hand. I'm proud of you, she said, and it was the first time someone had said that without judgment. It gave me courage, a flicker of it, but enough to keep going. Work was harder. Greg's comments had escalated, and one day, he crossed a line, muttering something homophobic under his breath during a meeting. I snapped, standing up in front of everyone. Say it to my face, I said, my voice shaking but loud. The room went silent. Greg backpedaled, but the damage was done. My boss called me in later, not to fire me, but to apologize. We don't tolerate that, he said, and for the first time, I felt seen at work. But my parents were the real test. I drove upstate again, unannounced, my heart in my throat. They were in the backyard, gardening. When I arrived, we need to talk, I said, and they knew. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd done homework as a kid, and I told them everything, Julian. The love, the fear, the truth. My mom cried. My dad stayed silent, but they didn't kick me out. We don't understand, my dad said finally. But you're our son. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a crack in the wall. I drove back to the city feeling lighter, like I'd shed a layer of armor I'd been carrying too long. Julian was waiting at the rusty anchor, his smile hesitant but warm. How'd it go? He asked, and I told him, the words spilling out. He hugged me, and for the first time, I didn't pull away. We started rebuilding. Slowly. I brought Julian to meet Jess, and they hit it off, laughing over stories of my terrible cooking. I started posting photos online not just of the city, but of us. Small moments that felt like victories. The world didn't end. Some friends drifted away, but others stayed. And new ones came, people like Lila, who showed me what it meant to live unapologetically. But the real test came when Julian got an off-air photography gig in Los Angeles. A 6-month project. Come with me, he said, his eyes bright with possibility. My first instinct was fear, leaving New York. My job. The last threads of my old life. But then I looked at him. At the man who'd shown me what it meant to be free. And I knew. I'm in, I said. And the words felt like a promise. Not just to him, but to myself. We spent the next month planning. Packing. Dreaming. The night before we left, we went back to the rooftop in Williamsburg, the city sparkling below. You're not running anymore, Julian said, his hand in mine. I'm not, I said, and kissed him. The fear gone, replaced by something stronger, love. Raw and real. Los Angeles was a new world. All sunshine and sprawl. So different from New York's sharp edges. We found a tiny apartment in Silver Lake, cluttered with Julian's camera gear and my books. And it felt like home in a way I'd never known. The move wasn't easy. I left my job, took a freelance gig that paid less but gave me freedom, and leaned on Julian more than I wanted to admit. But every morning, waking up next to him, I knew it was worth it. The city embraced us, We found community in queer bars, art galleries, and late-night taco stands, surrounded by people who live their truths without apology. Julian's project thrived, his photos capturing the heart of LA's underground scene. I started writing, something I'd always loved but never pursued, pouring my story into words. Our story. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. My parents called sometimes. Their voice is softer now. They asked about Julian, about LA, and I could hear the effort in their questions. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was progress, and I held on to that. Mike visited once, bringing his new girlfriend, and we laughed like old times, the past fading into something we could all live with. One evening, Julian took me to a beach in Malibu, the sun dipping into the ocean, painting the sky in pinks and golds. He set up his camera, a ritual I'd grown to love, and asked me to stand by the water. "Just be you," he said, and I did, feeling the sand under my feet, the wind in my hair, the weight of my old life gone. He showed me the photo later, my silhouette against the sunset, and I saw the man I'd become. Not perfect, but whole. "This is my favorite," Julian said, his voice soft. "Because it's you. All of you." We stood there, the waves crashing, and I knew this was the meaning I'd been searching for, not a perfect ending, but a beginning. I thought I was straight, thought I knew who I was. But Julian had shown me that life wasn't about knowing. It was about growing, loving, and choosing truth, no matter how hard. I took his hand, the future uncertain but ours. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid.